Florida, a state covered in long, beautiful beaches, warm weather, and many tourists. But hidden in its depths are underwater caverns that are mysterious yet beautiful for all who dare to enter. It's no surprise that cave diving runs rampant throughout the entire state as divers flock from around the world to visit and explore its wonder. There is a very rich history filled with exploration, advancement, and of course, tragedy. For two Florida college students in July of 1992, they would quickly find out the terror lurking below the surface. This is their story. Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel where we cover all tragic and terror stories. So if you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, plus ring the notification bell to be notified of all new uploads. And as always, viewer discretion is advised. Located in Alachua, Florida, one would find Alachua Sink, which was renamed to the Mill Creek Sink in 2003 due to another sink taking the Alachua name, but many divers and locals still refer to it as its original namesake. You see, the system has a rich history for cave divers. Under this sinkhole is the only known access point to the underground Mill Creek stream. The sink resides at the bottom of a 50-foot, nearly vertical cliff edge. It is an intense sight as debris of fallen trees and bushes leave the water at the surface a constant, murky green color. It does not look appealing or inviting, but never judge a book by its cover, as when a diver leaves Mill Creek Sink and enters Mill Creek Stream, the water begins to clear out and eventually revealing a beautiful cave system. It was first explored by some of the most famous cave divers in the world, Sheck Exley and Court Smith, where the original survey map was drawn and published for other divers. The first test of the sink would simply be accessing the water, as in the 1980s, divers would tie a rope around a nearby tree to rappel into the sink with over 100 pounds of gear on their backs. Once one enters the water, they would have to descend to 130 feet before hitting the bottom. Here, the main cave system splits into two tunnels. One leads against the flow upstream, and the other with the flow downstream. Visibility can be extremely poor based on the weather conditions and how much debris may have fallen into the sink. Divers may need to wait a few days for water visibility to improve depending on the conditions. Even on good days, it typically will not improve until the diver enters a downstream or upstream tunnel. Each pathway contains various caverns that can have depths as deep as 227 feet. Diving below roughly 20 to 30 feet greatly increases the risk of the exploration for inexperienced divers, as decompression stops are needed to expel dissolved nitrogen in the diver's bloodstream as they surface. Failing to do so would bring on the bends, which can be painful in extreme cases lead to death. Because of this, and the extremely low visibility throughout the cave, the dive is deathly dangerous. Simply losing the line could very easily lead to a catastrophic situation. This is why the cave is recommended only for truly experienced divers, and today you would have to have a guide along with over 100 cave dives post-certification to even be considered to enter. These rules were established after 1992, mostly because of the story that I have for you today, which takes place in July of that same year. Lance Crawford was a 23-year-old University of Florida agriculture student. He always enjoyed exploring the outdoors as he obtained his cave diving certification a month earlier and was very eager to explore the underwater caves. Lance had heard about the Mill Creek Sink and the challenges it posed and felt like it was calling to him. He knew it would physically challenge him, something he was always looking for. He was known to partake in activities like skydiving and shark hunting, so it's no surprise that Lance would develop an interest in cave diving. On July 24th, Lance and an unnamed friend would both drive down to Mill Creek Sink with the intention of reaching Mill Creek Stream. All articles have excluded Lance's diving partner's identity, so for the sake of this story, we will call the unnamed friend John. Now, John was also a certified cave diver, but like Lance, has only had his certification for about a month. It didn't take long for the duo to find the sink and lug their gear 50 feet down a steep incline, which had to be done by tying a rope to a tree and slowly lowering oneself. Stars lit up the night sky as the clock told them it was a little past 9 p.m. As both divers entered the water, they noticed the poor conditions as it had been raining recently, and the water visibility was worse than normal as they could only see about 6 inches in front of them. Understandably, John was hesitant to even start the dive as something just felt off. The conditions were poor, he was not as excited as Lance, and when it came down to it, he just did not feel safe. They both knew they were underexperienced for this cave, as the ground did have a warning sign. But Lance was beaming with excitement as the anticipation of what lay underneath was fast approaching. He enjoyed diving more than most and looked forward to the challenge. Despite the conditions, Lance had a careless attitude, like he almost did not believe that what he was about to attempt was even dangerous to begin with. So, with a few quick words and a little reluctance from John, both divers would slide on their masks and submerge themselves. It's important to note that a dive line normally is not set up at the entrance of a cave. This is to make sure recreational divers do not enter a cave by carelessness. However, for the Mill Creek Sink, a dive line is almost mandatory to even begin the dive due to the visibility. Once Lance and John had submerged, they identified where the dive line was and began to follow it deep into the depths. After moving down the first room, the duo would have entered a 300 to 400 foot wide open room called Crawfish Heaven. But as John and Lance continued, the visibility only got worse. So bad that they still had not been able to see the walls that surrounded them. With only a few minutes into the dive, John was having serious doubts. The risks were extremely high with no sign of reprieve. He honestly had no desire to continue and did not see a point in pushing himself further. Now, it's unclear exactly the position that Lance and John were both located at this moment. It is almost not clear if they were on the same guideline. But what is clear is that both divers were near each other, with John either ahead of Lance or on a separate line. John, feeling really uneasy at this point about the dive and continuing, would turn to locate Lance. But again, the visibility was so poor, it was challenging to keep sight of each other. When John turned back to look for Lance, he could not spot him. And already nervous, John knew that he had to try to remain calm, which was challenging because deep down John was panicking. Nevertheless, John quit moving deeper into the cave. He grasped the water all around him, searching for a sign from Lance. Over and over his hands would extend, but every time they would return with nothing. John was careful and meticulous in order to not silt out the water even further, but with the current visibility, it was almost impossible to not make a mistake. John did not know at the time how long he had been searching for Lance, but would later find out he had spent over an hour searching through the silt, barely able to see his hands reaching out in front of him. Eventually, he began to think of himself. Frustrated and scared, John turned himself around with the help of the guideline and began to slowly swim back to the surface. All while doing so, he kept a vigilant eye out for Lance, feeling in all directions as far as his arms would extend. It did not take long for him to resurface, as they had not ventured too far into the cave. Once he was above water, John quickly got out of the sink and took a moment to examine the water. He was looking for bubbles, any sign of air escaping that could have been coming from Lance's oxygen tanks. But just like under the surface, he saw nothing. John was beginning to lose hope, and the realization of the situation began to hit him as his stomach turned over with dread. The Alachua police were contacted and informed of the situation, and they would then call on the cave diver recovery team at Jenny Springs to assist. A team of 10 highly experienced cave divers would immediately respond to the call. It would take some time to get all their equipment, so the sink would constantly be monitored in case Lance did resurface. But as the night continued, the mood became more grim. If Lance somehow did survive, he should have resurfaced by now, and along with the fact that no air bubbles have been spotted, their chances were dwindling. Led by Jared Jablonski, all 10 divers would enter the water at 8 a.m. Saturday morning, almost 11 hours after Lance and John had originally entered the sink. The entire day was spent looking for any sign of Lance, but there was none. Progress was gruelingly slow for everyone, as divers struggled to venture far due to the visibility being so poor. There was a slight rainfall, which fed even more debris into the sink, making the rescue more dangerous than it already was. One could only see about a foot in front of themselves in the murky water. This process would continue over the next few days in a painfully slow manner for all those who anxiously waited to hear about Lance. The Mill Creek sink's conditions would not improve through the search, almost like the sink was antagonizing everyone searching on purpose. With each passing day, the expectation of a body recovery becoming the primary concern. In total, 50 divers would help with the search, which would continue to span over the weekend and into the following week. When Monday came around, morale was at an all-time low, and the team had been searching for about 2.5 days now, and there had been no sign of Lance. All news outlets at this point were reporting that Lance was most likely dead inside of the cave. Around 6 p.m., a diver was searching along the wall in the Crawfish Heaven room when he noticed that right about the 50-meter mark was an indentation in the wall forming a lip formation. It was there that Lance Crawford was found. The scene was painful to find and diagnose, as it was clear Lance had struggled until his last breath. All of his gear was still attached, although his mouthpiece was not in his mouth. From where his body was positioned, it was apparent that Lance was looking for the exit but had no visibility of the cave. He would have been in a state of panic with adrenaline pumping through his veins, frantically looking for a way out as he crawled along the wall with no guideline. With the small indentations along the walls and under the right circumstances, one could easily mistake the lip formation as an opening, which most likely is what Lance did. And in his panic, with no visibility, he managed to wedge himself in this lip formation, thinking it would continue forward. But the restriction only got tighter and tighter with no way out. Lance's body was stuck fairly deep into the wedge, so he could not be easily removed, and ultimately, his death would be ruled a drowning. It would take divers working through the night before they finally managed to remove Lance's body. Due to his location, there was not a lot of space to maneuver for more than a couple of rescue divers. Combine that with the visibility issue, and it's no surprise that the recovery took so long. He would not resurface until midday on Tuesday, only further highlighting the challenges that the rescue team faced. This story is dedicated to Lance Crawford's memory, and what we can learn from his experience, the importance of taking every dive seriously, not to push yourself past high-risk conditions, and to always listen to your gut. It's hard to say if Lance could have done something different to save himself underwater, but it is clear if Lance and John both were more experienced, they would not have attempted to dive Mill Creek Sink in such horrible conditions, and they both would have survived that night of terror.